You're watching the second video of our three-part series workshop. The Nutritional Health Workshop focuses on our dietary lifestyle and how it affects us in our everyday life.
Hi, we have a special message from Ms. Belcher.
Hi, I'm Sandy Belcher. I'm the director of the Collegiate High School program. I'm here today to introduce the segment on nutritional health. I think during the pandemic that we've all had been very lax in our eating habits. Easy to run through the fast food joint down the road. You don't have to social distance. You don't have to wear your mask and grab those fried foods or those high-fat foods. It eventually wears on your mental health and your ability to sleep and your ability to study. So keeping those things in mind, I think Professor Abshire will give you some more detailed information that will help you hopefully increase your study habits and help you make it through the rest of this pandemic during this semester. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Belcher, for supporting BTK.
To help give us more information about the importance of our nutritional health, we have Professor Abshire.
Hey everyone, this is Jason. I'm here today to talk about sugar with you. We're going to look at how sugar affects our brain today. Then we'll move on and we'll look at added sugars in our diet, things that we're taking in our diet that have sugar that's not naturally occurring. And then last, we'll look at habits and how we can improve habits, positive habits, so that we can reduce the amount of sugar in our diet. So the first thing you need to understand about sugar is its addictive properties. So sugar releases in our brain a neurotransmitter called dopamine. And so to understand dopamine, just think of anything you would do that's pleasurable. Are you playing a video game? Are you hanging out with friends? Are you getting messages on your cell phone? Are you eating a great meal? All those things are pleasurable to us. And because of that, our brain releases dopamine, that neurotransmitter. That pleasure in the brain lights up and we feel good. We're happy, right? And so that's one of the things we see with sugar. Dopamine is a positive in our lives because it does let us know what we enjoy, what's pleasurable. One of the negatives of dopamine is it can become addictive. We seek that feeling constantly. We crave that feeling of that dopamine response. And that's where sugar comes into play. With sugar, as we eat sugar, we get that dopamine response. We're happy, and it continually feels happy to eat sugar. You can eat it 10 days in a row, and all 10 days you're going to have that same wonderful response. That's not true with every activity. If I were to sit down to a great meal and enjoy that meal, yes, I would release dopamine. I would feel better. I would be happy. But about day 3 of that meal, probably not, if I'm eating that same thing over and over again, it's probably not going to be as pleasurable. So, for example, my wife makes wonderful marinated chicken and quinoa. Day 1 and 2 with leftovers, we're loving it, right? By day 3, it's just a good meal to us. By day 4, it's not bad. And so that's what's happening with dopamine. With regular things like foods, types of interactivity with friends, it may level off a little bit. But with sugar, it can be addictive because we always get that same response, that same pleasurable feeling from eating something that's sweet. Candy, sodas, drinks, whatever it may be. So that's one thing we need to consider. Another thing to consider with dopamine is meal planning. And so for some of you may be out there meal planning and trying to plan what you're going to eat throughout the week. You have to think, is that the same food every day? Am I eating it? Is it feeling bland and bored to me? And if it is, it's simply because you're not getting that dopamine response, kind of like my wife's meal after 3 days. You're not getting that same response. It's not feeling good, right? It's not as pleasurable to eat brown rice and vegetables and chicken 5 days in a row. So a lot of people fail at meal planning simply because the dopamine response isn't there. And what they need is more variety in their diet. A little more variety will provide that dopamine response again where you enjoy each of those meals day by day as you go through them instead of sticking with the same meal. So that's one of the factors that comes into play when we're taking sugar into our diets, all right? American diet is made up of a lot of sugar. Overall, we eat about 150 pounds of sugar per year. 150 pounds. That's quite a bit of sugar. Now, all that sugar is not what we call added sugar. Added sugar would be something like we all know right here. Okay? So 1 pound sugar pack, 2 pound block like this that we add into our foods. It might be in a drink we take in. This is what most people think of. So these are considered added sugars. Naturally occurring sugars will be sugars that you're going to find in fruits and vegetables, things that are plant-based that you buy and you eat that come from nature. Milk has lactose, which is a sugar. Fruit has fructose, which is another type of sugar. But what we're talking about today is we're looking at added sugars, the ones that we could eliminate from our diet or cut back on throughout the way we make choices. So one of the things you think of right off the bat for sugar might be sweets, right? I think we all do. We all recognize that we eat sweets. So what things would you think, if you're just taking a wild guess, where are we getting most of this added sugar? What foods or drinks would it be coming from? And the answer to that, as you may already know, is soda. All right. Sodas are bringing a lot of added sugar into our diet. Not just sodas. We're looking at energy drinks that are full of sugar, those really nice caffeinated coffee drinks at different places that have full of sugar. That's where the majority of our added sugar in our country comes from. And so today we want to look at maybe some ways that you can reduce that intake, give you some ideas and some tips on that going forward, right? But before we go there, I want to share with you a little bit about what I call sugar addiction. I just mentioned to you dopamine. So dopamine is definitely one of the reasons I got hooked on sugar, that pleasurable feeling. But there's something else there. There's another factor that comes into play. And then probably a lot of you experience this, right? Halloween. Halloween happy, right? You go get candy. It's that time of year, you're eating sweets, and you feel that boost that comes with that. That's dopamine response, we know. But there's another thing there which is called our glucose response, meaning when you eat candy, you get that feeling of hyperactivity you see kids feel or you felt as a kid at Halloween. That is your blood sugar rising rapidly, which is glucose. Glucose is the sugar in your blood. And then, so you've probably all experienced this. You know what it feels like to get that little boost of energy. That can be highly addictive as well, that feeling you're looking for, right? And so for me, that was a big part of it. Through high school and college, I ate sugar all the time and never thought a thing of it. And I was on a roller coaster for a good while there. For me, with sugar, what was happening was I would eat candy. I would eat, drinks, Dr. Peppers, all those things. That was kind of my daily fix during the day. And at night, I loved ice cream. So I'd sit there and just eat ice cream 5 nights a week, always taking in sugar. And so again, we know that dopamine was one of the reasons. We know that I was getting that quick rush of energy like we do at Halloween. That was another reason. And for those to put those two together, and that's pretty tough to break that habit, right? I was getting to the point where I would be brought up by something and then come down off that sugar crash. And you probably have seen the Snickers commercials in the past. If you haven't, you can look them up. But the Snickers commercial says you really want yourself, so they eat a Snickers bar to make you feel better again. And that's what that person is looking for. They're looking for dopamine. They're looking for a glucose response, a blood sugar rise. And that's what they do over and over again. And I was doing this repeatedly. And honestly, I didn't even recognize that I felt this way. I didn't even understand what was happening to me. I just thought everybody felt like me, that at 11 o'clock in the afternoon, you're supposed to be yawning and tired. At 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, a couple hours after lunch, I was supposed to feel lethargic. And that's not the way we should feel. That was directly related to my sugar levels going up and sugar levels coming down rapidly from eating all those sweets. So I had to look past that and try to figure out something, to make some changes in my habits so that I could improve my health. At that point, and we're talking about as I'm finishing my college career up, I was hypoglycemic. I developed hypoglycemia, which is borderline for becoming a type 2 diabetic. And that had to do directly to my diet, to the sugar that I was taking in. Currently, we have about 1 in 10 people who are diabetics in our country. And the projection for by about 2050, which is not too far away. So this generation now growing up into becoming middle-aged adults, they're looking at 1 in 3 people. About 33%, they think, of the population will be diabetic. And it's directly related to our diets. And so what you're wanting to do, or probably I'm sure you're wanting to do, is how am I going to change this? What am I going to do differently and adjust my diet going forward, right, as I move into adulthood and further into adulthood? I'd like to share with you today is my challenge with sugar, going through high school and college, my addiction to sugar. And going back, looking at what I was eating then, my diet was mostly added sugars, right? It was things like candy, definitely soda. Dr. Pepper is my favorite. Those were my daytime sugars. And I even would eat, cinnamon rolls on a work break for 15 minutes. I might sit down for 15 minutes at the grocery store, worked out, and grab 4 cinnamon rolls and eat all 4 of those. So sugar was all throughout my day. And again, like I said, at night, ice cream was a big part of my diet also. What I found was, though, that there was different parts of the day where I felt really bad. Sometimes I'd have a headache. Sometimes I would just be yawning and lethargic. And that was directly related to that sugar intake, that sugar level going up, and that sugar level coming down in my blood, my glucose response. And so it didn't feel good at all right? But I didn't recognize that right off the bat. So I kept on doing what I was doing. 5 nights a week, ice cream. Matter of fact, I get a cup this big. My dad taught me this. Habits are taught, right? Learned at home. My dad would get a big cup and stuff it full of ice cream. And I would get one right there with him. And we just eat our ice cream at night all through high school. And I continued that habit into college. And we used to joke around a lot. I used to at least joke around and think, I wish ice cream was healthy. I wish it was good for me. I wish I could just carry ice cream around all day and never melt and eat it whenever I wanted. Imagine that, right? I mean, how cool would that be? Like right there, holster. I got cookies and cream on this side, Dutch chocolate on this side. Never melts. I got a spoon in each hand. Anywhere I go, ice cream. Anytime I want it. It doesn't go bad. It doesn't melt. That would have been my dream back then as a high schooler in the college, to feel the ice cream anytime I wanted and not affect my health. I would have that wonderful dopamine response. I'd get that glucose response. I'd be happy all the time. But obviously that's not healthy, right? We know that no one's going to eat ice cream. Who's going to carry ice cream around or sweets with them around 24 hours a day and constantly eat them to seek that feeling? Well, we do this with sodas. And for a lot of you out there, your handy dandy devices you have in your hand right now in your pocket, our cell phones, there's the same thing. We get a pleasure release in the brain, okay, dopamine release in the brain from receiving text messages, from getting a snap from a friend, anything to do with getting messaging on our phone, our brain lights up, and it can be highly addictive just as sugar is, right? And it's something we can carry around and have with us all the time. So after all that sugar during my college years, I was at the point that I was almost a type 2 diabetic. I had hypoglycemic, which means my blood sugar was elevated, kind of the precursor for being a diabetic, and it was worrisome. And if we look at the statistics today, 1 in 10 people are diabetics in our country. Doesn't sound that bad, right? 1 in 10, that's not that bad. But going forward, we're looking at about 1 out of every 3 people who become type 2 diabetics. That's the projection for this current generation going forward. And so we're looking at how can we reduce the amount of sugar in our diets. And the first place we could probably start, all of us, is soda. As a matter of fact, the added sugars in our diets the majority of it comes from soda. Secondly, it's coming from food sources. And so today we're going to touch on drinks. For me, it was Dr. Pepper. I think, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Pepper was my go-to drink. Drank it daily, if often, maybe a few times a day, and that was what I was going with. So when I decided to start trying to change, I started trying to take in less Dr. Pepper, trying to figure out how would I do this. Well, the first thing is we want to know how much sugar might be in a Dr. Pepper to kind of help us learn. So I have a Dr. Pepper right here. This is a 20-ounce Dr. Pepper. This 20-ounce Dr. Pepper has 64 grams of sugar in it. Well, that's a number. It sounds kind of big, but most of us don't realize what 64 grams of sugar looks like. But you may have seen the little bags of sugar at a restaurant, those little single-size serving bags. It takes 14 of those to make 64 grams. So take 14 little packets, open them and dump them in here, and that's going to be our 64 grams of sugar in a Dr. Pepper. It's quite a bit of sugar. It's actually more than is recommended for a whole day for an adult male, and that's a single drink of 20 ounces. Whereas a lot of us are buying the larger drinks and carrying them around with us all day, right? So this is a small serving size for many of us in our diet. So that's what we're looking at. But for me, when I did this, I needed something that was more relevant. Like, I understand sugar at that point, but I wanted to figure out, well, what is, like, candy-wise or dessert-wise, what does this equate to? Because for me, it was getting to be, I needed to start making choices. And we're going to talk about them a little bit later, but they're called better bad choices. Like, a bad choice would be 2 desserts and 2 Dr. Peppers in a day. A better bad choice could be something like a single Dr. Pepper and no desserts that day. And so I wanted to find out, rationing my sugar for the day, where it was coming from. And so with this Dr. Pepper, I went with my favorite candy back in the day, which is Starburst. I love Skittles, Starburst, Spree, Chewy Spree, all those real sugary, sweet, colorful candies. But Starburst was my go-to on that. And so I looked up Starburst, okay? I pulled out my phone, my little handy-dandy device, got on the internet, did some good. Turns out 1 Starburst candy is a little less than 1 gram of sugar. So we can just round it up and call it a gram. So this equates to 64 Starburst candies, right? 64 Starburst. So in the morning, some of us might get up and grab this as our go-to drink without eating breakfast. Just grab a Dr. Pepper, heading to college. I'm going, driving to school. But you probably wouldn't think of putting 64 Starburst in your lap. So 64 Starburst in a Dr. Pepper. I mean, what does that look like? That's got to be a lot of candy, right? Let's take a look. 64 Starburst. That could be your breakfast if you're drinking a Dr. Pepper in the morning on an empty stomach. That could be your midday snack as you grab a Dr. Pepper or any soda, any sweet drink. And so what we know is that we're taking in way too much sugar in sodas. And that's what we're looking at today for the rest of this is how do we get away from that? How do we set up positive habits that help us get away from taking in too much sugar? And so, I got one more thing to tell you. Guess what? Dopamine. Yes. Glucose. Yes, that's that blood sugar response. There's one more thing in here that I bet you can guess that makes it highly addictive. It helps wake you up in the morning, everybody, right? It's caffeine. So there's three things that we're getting addicted to when we drink most sodas if they're caffeinated sodas. Dopamine, glucose response, and caffeine. And caffeine's a central nervous system stimulant, right? Heart rate goes up, brain's more lit up, we feel good. It's one of the most used drugs in our world, okay, for sure. And so how do we get away from this? Because that's kind of like the three Amigos. You get all three of those together and you got problems. And for me, this was the biggest hurdle to overcome was I found out the caffeine was more challenging for me than the sugar at times. And so we're going to look at ways today you can still have a little bit of those things in your diet and then maybe break that cycle of taking in so much sugar. So some of you are probably thinking, I choose diet drinks. I choose 0-calorie drinks. So for me, I don't have an issue with sugar. And it's possible. You may not. So a diet drink doesn't register in the brain the same way a sugary drink does. So at first, when I drank my Diet Dr. Pepper that first time, it tastes really good to me. It was pretty good compromise. After a while, it wasn't so good. And that part of that was I wasn't getting the same dopamine response in the brain that sugar would have given me with a regular Dr. Pepper. The other thing you're seeing is glucose response, right? That blood sugar response. It's not there. You're taking in some kind of synthetic sugar, artificial sweetener, and those things do not raise our blood sugar levels like true sugar would. And then, of course, the caffeine is still there if you're drinking a diet drink. So you get one of the three Amigos, but you don't get all three together. And that's why for a lot of people, sticking to a diet drink is very challenging. Now, if you're able to stick with some type of diet or 0-calorie version of what you were drinking before, we're still finding that people are taking in and consuming more calories during the day than they did if they hadn't done that. It's interesting. So what happens is if you gave up, say, 400 calories of your diet by not drinking sweet sodas because you're drinking your diet soda, most people are picking up those extra 300 or 400 calories somewhere else in their diet. It's like you're missing something by not getting those feelings and you're searching for pleasure somewhere else in your day. And for a lot of people, that comes from additional food. And so most people are not successful with diet drinks and trying to manage their weight and trying to get away from sugar. To make these changes happen, we are going to have to create new habits. And creating new habits can be very challenging. Most of us have had habits that we've set in place over many years of our life. And so to break that habit, it's not easy. It can take months and sometimes longer. Think of the habits we have. I know for myself, we had a habit of cleaning our plates at the dinner table. And so for my whole life, when I was at home with my family, parents tell you to clean your plate, right? Eat everything in your plate. It's going to make you strong. Don't waste food. And so I built up a habit of always finishing everything. So you may have experienced that type of habit too. And once they're there, they're very challenging to break. Again, months. We're not talking 30 days. We're not talking 2 weeks. We're talking months of steady progress towards a new habit before it's permanent. And so with those habits, you're going to have some failures along the way, if you want to think of it that way. We'll talk more about that in here in a minute. But for me, Dr. Pepper, I told you, was my weakness, my crutch. And so I wanted to change things. And so I realized, okay, I got 64 grams of sugar in this Dr. Pepper, and the Diet Dr. Pepper thing wasn't working for me. What do I do next? And so then that's when I understood I needed some of the three Amigos. I needed a little sugar in my diet. I still wanted the caffeine. I still wanted a bit of pleasure and happiness from what I was drinking. And so I made a switch. And I went to iced tea, just sweetened iced tea. Now, if I go through and I pick it up at a fast food place, you know it's going to be loaded with sugar. So I started making my own tea at home and then adding the sugar and finding what was just the right mix of sugar where it tasted good enough to me. I liked it, but then it wasn't as much sugar as it would typically be if I went to a restaurant. And what I came up with is I could get about a 20-ounce glass, about the same amount as this Dr. Pepper, and I could put 4 packets of sugar in there. 4 packets of sugar, that's it. That's 16 grams of sugar versus 64. So that compromise, that change, cut my sugar intake to the fourth of what it was before when I drank a sweet drink. So that was very helpful to me. And so you can do the same. You can start finding ways to cut back and choose drinks that have less sugar. You could even blend part of a regular Dr. Pepper with a diet Dr. Pepper if you needed to. Because for me, I needed a little bit of sugar. I needed that to be there for me. That glucose response needed to be part of what I had to enjoy that drink, right? So some of you might be thinking, well, you still put sugar in your tea. That's a bad choice. And we like to call that a better bad choice. Meaning, yes, obviously just drinking tap water would be the best choice possible for me to drink. The whole Dr. Pepper is the bad choice. The iced tea is the better bad. I had a little sugar. I had a little caffeine. I had a little something I like. But what we find is people who are successful in staying on a particular diet program and managing a healthy weight, they give themselves some of those things that they like. Because if you don't, it's too strict. And a lot of people just don't do good with that cold turkey approach to anything in their life. And so for me, that's where I go with better bad choices. Think of the people who you've seen who've had New Year's resolutions. And they come out strong. They're excited about, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to run, and I'm going to walk, and I'm going to read 6 books a week, and all these new ideas. They can't stick to it because it's just too much. It takes them out of their comfort zone, and it freaks them out a bit. And then they go right back to their old habits. Well, for me, if I went strictly away from that drink to just pure water, I wasn't going to stick with it. I didn't even manage it when it was a giant Dr. Pepper. So I knew I needed a little something that I preferred. And again, we call those better bad choices. I did the same thing with my ice cream addiction. At first, instead of this big glass that me and my dad used to eat, I just started cutting down the portions and eating less in that same cup. And so again, ice cream is not the best choice, but that was my better bad choice. Another thing I did that I found that worked really well to pair along with this was I wanted to break that habit I mentioned to you before of cleaning my plate, of eating everything in front of me. And this was the hardest part, honestly. I would eat the ice cream that I put in a cup, so I had a smaller serving. In the last bite of ice cream, I would pour that in the sink and I would run water on it and watch it melt away. Wow. Do you know how challenging that was? Because it's just one more bite. It wasn't going to make that much difference. But what I was trying to do is reprogram my thinking about food. That the food no longer dictated that I had to eat all of it, that I could leave that one bite aside and not eat it. And it was hard for months. Every time I did that, that was the hardest thing to do, was to watch that little bite of ice cream go away. But again, that's building a different habit. I don't have to clean my plate anymore. I don't feel the need to eat everything in front of me. And so that helped me along the way as I worked on my sweets. It's helped me in other areas of my diet as well. But what about habits, right? We just said they're very challenging. They're very difficult to build new habits. Here's what you want to remember is you're going to fail, and it's okay. As you set these new habits, you try to make these changes, taking in less sugar, it's okay to fail. Most people won't tell you that. I'm going to tell you that. It's okay to fail. You're going to fail many times. The average person who's trying to create a new habit will fail 6 times. And that's the average. Some people it takes longer. Some people a few more, but you're going to fail. So what you need to understand is what? Failure is not really failure on the way. You're learning as you go. People who are successful have plan B, plan C, plan D. They already have those. And they know that when plan A doesn't go the way they want, they'll just fall back and try plan B. Plan B doesn't work. They go to plan C. And they're not mad at themselves or upset with themselves because that happened, because they knew that was the process. So when you're breaking habits and creating new ones, that will be your process going forward. It's going to be a challenge. If you feel like you're like I was and you're hooked on sugar, it will be challenging. It will take months and you will have failures. But please remember when you fail what it truly means. F-A-I-L. That is your first attempt in learning. That's all it is. Our failures are our teachers. That will help you learn along the way until you figure out what works best for you, which could be very different than what works best for me as far as cutting sugar out of your diet, adjusting other parts of your diet, or even other parts of your life. That's all for now. Thanks for joining us today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is jabshire, A-B-S-H-I-R-E, @com.edu. Take care and enjoy an active week.
Thank you, Professor Abshire. Taking care of our nutritional intake is very important and plays a key role in our academics. Healthy eating creates healthy feelings. Keeping up with our nutritional health will ensure your brain has the fuel it needs to become successful. We just finished watching our second video of our 3-part series. We missed our first video that covers mental health. We will link it in the description box. Stay tuned for the next video finishing up our 3-part series workshop.